Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck tech video. Today I'm going to continue catching up, and this is going to be one for my Mono Black EDH deck. It is kind of an influx deck. Was running Kothophed here since he was an interesting general, and I'll get back to him shortly. The only reason he's in the Zoom now is simply because the invocation cards are not easily recordable. So while you can clearly see this card out of sleeve, even in just one layer of sleeve, the invocation card is barely legible. But Bontu is the current general, and I'll explain why. It's not actually a dedicated Bontu deck. She's just here because she happens to be indestructible. Bontu the Glorified is a 2-black for 5/6 menace indestructible body, and she can't attack or block unless I have had a creature die on my battlefield at some point in time that turn. She does have a pay 1 and a black to sack, to scry, to bleed 1, gain 1. It's an interesting card. Personal preference for this type of legendary. If you want a sack general, there's better. If you want a bleed general, there's better. If you want a good stuff general, there's better. Bontu is here because I have a passion for the card Pestilence, and having an indestructible mono black creature that just doesn't seem to go away. It was really good. This was actually going to be a Yahenni deck because Yahenni can give himself indestructible so he can survive Pestilence turns. But I mean, that's something that does cost more to work with to keep him around. One, I could just cast Bontu and forget she's even there. There's some effects in the deck that help with her. There are lots of effects you can add to a Bontu deck. But yeah, let's actually get started, and I will show what the deck used to be, because in this current state, as it is, it's kind of a semi-optimized deck for a casual group, optimized for what a Pestilence deck can be, that is. And I'll show what the deck will most likely transform into, because I have a lot of stuff that I just generically love playing in Mono Black. Not optimal, but just cards I like seeing. And I'll show the Kothophed nonsense that was before this too. So this is the current general. This is mainly here because it's a shiny invocation. Ooh. And she is indestructible. That is the actual only reason she's the commander. So there's a few creatures. There's actually not a lot of creatures. This may need to be increased a bit. There are 2 fodder for Bontu. There's a Bloodsoaked Champion and a Reassembling Skeleton. These 2 are nice because they can keep popping back after you sacrifice with Bontu. They are kind of the actually only enabling creatures for Bontu in the deck, but there's more. For example, if you wanted to do some zombies, like if you naturally had some flesh bags in your deck or a Graveborn Muse, you could even add in Gravecrawler. Just another cheap 1 mana thing that just keeps on coming back from your graveyard. This also means Skull Clamps, obviously, in the deck. Going on to some just generic, if I have sack effects in my deck, then this will hopefully replace itself at some point, if not more. Coffin Queen is another way of just getting generic stuff back at the graveyard. She tends to just die really fast. People don't like letting her resolve to untap, but I mean, she can give me the fodder to sack to Bontu. Then there's some generic mono black stuff. Pestilence decks, if you're not familiar with Enchantment, we'll get to it, but those decks need lots of mana. So there's Burnished Heart and Solemn for ramp. Getting lands into play is optimal over an artifact that taps for mana, because they're harder to deal with, and one specific version of my Pestilence coming up requires higher lands. And of course, Disciple Bolus is one of the best mono black staples for casual groups. Just gain some life, draw some cards, and keep on recurring them, doing it over and over again. Here's the first of many mana doublers in the deck. Shriek Maul is a fun thing we can put on the stack when you evoke. It is still in play, so you can sack Shriek Maul to scry if you need to. But that just comes up to like a 3 mana effect. Blood Gift Demon is another generic filler. This is like one of the cards that will likely be replaced when I start weeding this back to my generic me good stuff, not actual Pestilence deck. Stuffy Doll is one of the best cards to run in a Pestilence deck. You target an opponent, and then whenever you activate your Pestilence effect, they take extra damage. If you give Stuffy Doll lifelink, since he does the redirection damage himself, you are no longer taking damage from Pestilence. He's also just really good at getting people to not want to attack you with early non-trample effects. Archfiend is another generic good stuff card. I just kind of like it. It will be one that is replaced with some of the more interesting cards I tend to enjoy more. He was actually really good when I was running Kothophed. Kothophed, if you don't know what this guy does, this was the previous general, the general I may be going back to. It is essentially a high-risk kind of card, not really because he costs so much, but whenever permanent play, you bleed one and draw one, so this was a good way of consistently keeping permanents off play and drawing lots of cards. There's another mana doubler of the deck. Narcana Revenant is, of course, a nice threat because she can, of course, make herself humongous. Sad thing is she does not have flying or evasion. Wormcoil is just another generic filler. This is something that can easily be replaced. It's something that can give Bontu at least 3 different things to scry 3 times. Noxious Gearhawk is a nice removal. This was also in here for Kothophed because gaining a lot of life was necessary in that deck since you tend to really just kill yourself. Same thing, Kokosho, generic filler, gives you a lot of life, especially if you can recycle around. There's things like a Phyrexian Reclamation in this deck. So we have a sack effect on our general. We could just continually pop it back with some effects. Sepulchral Primordial is just a nice way of generating a large board presence. This is kind of a mid-range threat, something that you want to cast to generate advantage that requires removal, like you're baiting out a removal spell. But in the effect of you casting this, you're hopefully getting opponents enter the battlefield triggers from good stuff in their graveyard, so you've essentially built yourself up further. So even if they board wipe, it doesn't matter. That's what this kind of mid-range threat is good at. Rune's Guard is somewhat similar, he just tutors for the effect. Usually I will like to get some kind of recursion effect with him because I know he won't stick around long. Same thing with Sheoldred. She tends to die real fast. She's just a generic filler that likes to really be cloned, and then it makes for awkward board presences. But it's also a nice way of getting fodder back for Bontu to keep sacking. Pestilence Demon. This is the first of the 3 Pestilence variants in this deck. This one is probably the worst. He is overcosted, and of course I have to spam his ability all on the stack at once if I'm going to exceed 6 damage. But I mean, it's also a 7/6 flying beat stick. He's pretty nice. And Avatar Woe is another filler. I had the fun card to put in here, and in the group I'm playing this with, there's lots of creatures. So he is quite frequently just a 2-drop 6/4 or 6/5 fear. Again, that could be something easily replaced and upgraded with just better. Now let's go on to the rest of the cards. This is still remnant of Kothophed, where I had a lot of target removal. Target removal in Kothophed essentially cantripped, because the permanent would go to their graveyard and I would draw a card. But so we have a Dismember, a Terror, a Go for the Throat, and a Malicious Affliction, which is usually sometimes a nice 2-for-1, especially if you have like a Sheoldred effect out, or if you flush bagged or something like that. We have some wipes in the 3-drop, a 4-drop, and an 8-drop. Now the cool thing is they just started spoilers for the second Amonkhet set, so there is an on-theme Bontu board wipe that costs 3 mana, 1 black, and sorcery, and you just don't untap your lands. But being a 3rd wipe, or a 3rd version Damnation is going to be nice. And then we have the actual game-ending effects if we don't already try to just kill with creatures or Pestilence. We have a Drain Life for targeting one specific player, and we have Exsanguinate for the entire table. Again, a Pestilence deck makes tons of mana. That's the whole point of the deck. You just want to have an absurd amount of mana. So just having these as backup plans is typically game ending. This itself can usually just end the game on its own if you have 1 or 2 mana doublers out. Then we have a fair amount of tutors. We have the Vamp, a Demonic, and a Diabolic Intent. This is only in here because I have things like the Reassembling Skeleton and the Blood-Soaked Champion. If the creature count in this deck were to drop below like 16, then this would obviously be not a good card to run. This is here because as a Mono Black deck, you would expect this to have a Cabal Coffers. People love blowing up Cabal Coffers. So having something like this is just to return the coffers. Getting the extra creature back may be helpful, that's nice, but this is essentially return target Cabal Coffers from your graveyard to your hand. And we have some generic fillers for draw. Again, these are just here to help streamline the deck, dropping the mana curve, helping us get more options earlier in the game. 3 of them essentially do the same thing: draw 2, lose 2, read the bones, lets us scry a little bit. Reanimate is just a very powerful card. For a 1 mana spell, this utility, just for 1 single mana, is ridiculous. I mean, if you have black in your EDH deck, there's a and people in your play group play creatures, might as well just run this. I mean, there's no point not doing it. We have some targeted Reanimate that only works on our side, requires a creature, of course. And a Mass Reanimate. This tends to be a win more card in more casual groups. It's literally as if the game has gone on past 5 turns and you can cast this spell, then you just get a bunch of value. If the game has lasted past like 10 turns and no one's graveyard has been like spam exiled, then this will likely give you a winning game. And Yogg's Will is another way of getting Cabal Coffers back, and a whole bunch of other stuff as well. There are 3 Planeswalkers in the deck. There's my favorite Liliana. She gets me the swamps I need. Again, the deck needs the swamps. Every single turn I need a landfall, and this is my favorite Liliana. The removal on her is nice. I mean, late game she can actually kill like an Avacyn, Angel of Hope. The -6 on her is godly, but of course it's unlikely to ever happen. Most opponents know to kill her before you get anywhere near that. Second favorite Lily, well, I like the Veil more, I don't know. I have it in between, I like a lot of Lilies. This one right here is essentially just a 5-mana top deck tutor that also means someone attacks it next turn. It's just a nice sort of semi-evasion. Ultimate's never going to happen. The target +1 generically never happens unless you're playing 1v1, and this is not a good deck in 1v1. Then we have an Obinix. This was essentially Kothophed 2.0 because he either drew me a card and lost a life, or I killed a creature, which would, with Kothophed out, draw me a card and lose a life. So we have a few enchantments. Here are the 2 namesake cards of the deck, Pestilence and Withering Wisp. Pestilence is the OG, beta, alpha, whatnot one. Withering Wisp is an Ice Age version of the exact same card, just costs less. So 4 mana for an enchantment or 3 mana for an enchantment. What they do is I can sink black mana into them, and it does 1 damage to all creatures and all players, including myself. Withering Wisp has a cap. I cannot sink more black into it than the total number of snow lands I control. But Pestilence, of course, I can sink as much black mana as I have. For example, if I had a mana doubler or a mana rock. At the end of turn, if there are no creatures around, just like the red version Pyrohemia, then the enchantments have to be sacrificed. So that's why this is the commander. She is indestructible. She will not go away. And if she's out, and these I can just sink infinitely into, and they just don't go away. There are, of course, some rule effects that people get gripey about. If she somehow lost indestructible and she had more than 6 damage on her, damage is saved, essentially known to have been affected on that card throughout the turn. So if she lost indestructible and she had more than 6, she would still die. But that's just random rule pickups. Something like that's likely going to be a more issue rule in the standard environment, because there's a board wipe possibly being printed that makes things lose indestructible. Either way. So these are the goals of the deck. I just love Pestilence. And again, combining this with a Stuffy Doll helps you double up on somebody. Doing this in mono red, or adding red to your deck, means you can also add damage doublers like Furnace of Wrath, and you can make the game end real fast. Going on, we have a Phyrexian Reclamation. Again, this is mainly here simply because we have stupid shit like the Blood-Soaked Champion, or just cheap generic creatures that we want to keep on rebuying. This is, of course, really annoying when you have something like a Kokosho. There's not AC/DC in this deck, the Undead Vizier. That would be a good card to add simply because of this right here. In Attrition, again, this is a nice way of getting another sacrifice effect to allow Bontu to attack. It just helps destroy more creatures. And an Arena, I had possibly, it may come back in as a Dark Ritual, because turn 1 arenas are always a good way to start a game. We have the broad, or a gap between artifact and enchantment, which is Whip. This is again a remnant of Kothophed. It may be replaced. Getting lifelink off of a few hits is nice, but it also helps a possible reanimation for some enter the battlefield trigger. I may take this one out before the Blood Gift Demon, because it just doesn't seem to affect this deck too much. And then we have oodles of artifacts. We have, of course, a Skull Clamp. The Blood-Soaked Champion and Reassembling Skeleton immediately makes me want to put this in the deck. I mean, this is a fine tutor target if I see one of those 2 creatures. It just helps early turns dig and fill, and just, yeah, it's kind of a dumb card. We have Sword of the Animist. Again, this is a Pestilence deck, so we want all the swamps. So this can sometimes equate to just getting an extra swamp every single turn. I mean, even if it's recklessly attacking into unfavorable blocks, that extra swamp is what the deck needs to win the game with, so go for it. Then we have these 2 guys. These are, again, remnants of Kothophed, where he would become like a one-hit kill. So something like these can make just whimsical creatures humongous. These are also great fodder to equip to when you have the Disciple of Bolas coming up, because it just gives you a bunch of extra cards in life. And then finally we have the Batterskull. It's another thing we can sack. It comes in with a little token, and it's a nice backup win condition if we have a hard time keeping creatures on the battlefield. If someone's playing Grave Pact crap, then we can just keep bouncing and casting it to get the new token. So we always have a creature online. We have Expedition Map just to get the Goal Coffers. There is, of course, a Deserted Temple in the deck. So Deserted Temple would be a nice secondary target after the coffers. And we have a little bit of ramp. We have a Soul Ring and a Bauble, gets the swamp. And then a Jet Medallion. Mono Black or monocolor decks can sometimes benefit from these. This deck does not have a lot of colorless spells or artifact spells compared to what you're seeing. So this is probably one of the better 2-drop rocks over, like a Mind Stone. Then we have 3 mana doublers, Cage Sun, Gauntlet, and Lens. I don't like Lens. It's not a May ability when it gets flickered and you have to keep exiling lands, but it's a card that makes mistakes happen in early games. What it does, if you're unfamiliar with this, when it comes into play, you have to imprint essentially exiling one of your own lands, and then that land taps for, that land type taps for double. So again, we're playing snow-covered lands to enable the Withering Wisp, the second Pestilence there. So no one else usually gets the benefit, but what happens is sometimes you won't have any early game plays except for this, and you will be tempted to cast it. So on your next turn you have powerful plays. Just don't even try. Like, even if you know your opponents are unlikely to be able to remove it, don't try, because you'll just get yourself set back. So the way this one works is you just wait till you're about to win the game. Have this to be one of the final cards you're cast on the turn when you already have a billion mana, and then you're good. And then, of course, we have just the generic ones, the Gauntlets and the Cage Sun. So I think 5 mana doublers in this deck. Now let's go on to the lands. There are 37, I believe. I am missing a Lake of the Dead and an Urborg, which I will get for the deck eventually. Cabal Coffers is, of course, the default. Some people like running things like Vesuva or Thespian Stage to copy it. I like having a threshold of about 30 swamps in my deck. That gives you not a lot of room for extra non-basics, and those two typically don't make the cut. Temple is a placeholder for most likely Lake of the Dead. Myriad Landscape replaces up to more swamps. Deserted Temple goes with Cabal Coffers to help generate an absurd amount of mana. Again, fun things to copy with Vesuva if you have Coffers out. Then we have a Volrath Stronghold. It's just a generic card to get. Again, if there's a fewer amount of creatures in the deck, then this would not actually be worth including over just a swamp. And then 32 of these things. They're all snow covered. I don't like the new artwork on the second whatever. I prefer the older snow covered lands better. I hope at some point they reprint full art snow covered lands. But anyways, this is Bontu. I didn't even know this was it's a god, but I didn't know it held the female gender until I saw her other artwork. And I think some kind of removal card. But I like this card. It's interesting. It's pretty. I don't really like the invocations. Personal opinion. The border out here is absolutely god-awful. The only ones I like are the mono black ones, because it has the border on all of them have a little bit of black, but the mono black ones like this and Mind Twist, they look nice because the black sequences all together. But this is Bontu. If you have any opinions or ideas or feedback about Bontu, let me know. And at the end here, I'm just going to go show what I was running, because again, I had a Kothophed deck. Kothophed was an interesting card that was essentially the entire deck before. Again, he's a 6 mana 6/6 flying. That's generic vanilla crap because he costs too much. But he has this effect whenever a permanent owned by an opponent goes in their graveyard, and then I lose a life and draw a card. It's not a May ability, which is the number 1 bad thing. The number 2 bad thing is he's 6 mana. So those two effects right there, he appears to be high risk, high reward, but his mana cost puts him immediately into the casual spectrum. By the time opponents are cracking fetch lands and sack your Tribe Elders, he's going to be still in your command zone before you can reap those benefits. Of course, there is some scenarios where someone may Armageddon, and everyone's lands go in the graveyard, so you could draw 20 cards and lose 20 life, and you probably just killed yourself. But he's an interesting card. I may go back to him just because he's interesting. The deck I was running him in had a lot of lifelink to offset his loss, and lots of ways of ritualing him out really early. And since he's a flying body, things like Hatred. Well, actually, I'll just have a stack of cards here. Let me show you. This is a stack of generic shit that I like to run in Mono Black. So these are some cards that may pop back into the Bontu deck here. Darkness is just a fun classic card. I love having the random fog effect. The unexpected cards are the cards I like playing in the mono deck colors that you don't expect. So we have a Hatred, for example. This can be a one-shot kill on any evasive creature. Bontu does have Menace, but she is on the ground. Having a flying general makes this more playable. Bane of the Living came out because it gave Bontu negative. Overwhelming Forces was just a more expensive one-targeted Wrath. Same thing, Black Suns came out because it could kill Bontu. Gate of Phyrexia, or Gate to Phyrexia, is a kind of a janky artifact removal card for Mono Black. It works in heavier token strategies. If there are going to be more tokens in Bontu, then this would be playable. Singular Autocrat is one of the ways of getting more tokens. 4-drop for just that many bodies is interesting if I wanted to scry. If Bontu actually had a draw effect, then you would see more effects like this in the deck. Kagamaru is again something that came out because it killed Bontu. Withering Boon is a funny counterspell. Entomb helps if there's specific graveyard tech coming up. Same thing as this one of my favorite tutors. It just gets just about any 2-drop out of your deck. It can get you a Demonic Tutor. It can get you an Exsanguinate. Howl from Beyond is like Hatred, where on a flying general, especially with a lot of mana doublers, it can just make a lethal hit. We have Mischief for the funny redirect. It's really great if someone's trying to draw a lot of cards or remove something. Grave Titan because it grants tokens. Ashes to Ashes, another removal spell. This came out before I even took Kothophed apart because Exile does not work. Ritual of the Machine is a way of sacking a creature to gain something. This is a nice tempo kind of swing if the opponent has no way of dealing with their own threat, for example. Dark Ritual may go back in because I like having the option for turn 1 Phyrexian Arena. Head Games is funny. It's really funny. This can make irate opponents. The best way to play this card is to roll a dice, because if you consistently hit the same opponent in a multiplayer game, they are going to get pissed at you. What this does, it's a 5-drop sorcery, so it's obviously not meant to be competitive. You target one opponent, you essentially take the number of cards in their hand, shuffle their deck and their hand together, and you give them the same amount of cards back. What I like doing is getting shitty come into play tap lands out of their deck. The last time I played this against a buddy, he was playing a fairly broken Bray artifact deck, and I decided to go get his artifact lands, because a buddy to my right already had an Aura Shards on the table. Shade's Form is a fun, sometimes a 2-for-1. I like putting this on opponent's Solemn Simulacrums because it reanimates a creature and I can also pump Shade Effect the creature, even if it's not my own. Oubliette is a very outdated exile. It's like an Oblivion Ring. Gravestorm is a super hyper casual way of getting extra devotion. This is nice in Erebos. It just essentially is a 3-drop enchantment that makes opponents exile a card out of their graveyard every turn. No one really lets you draw the card, but it's nice devotion. Wake the Dead for more end of the battlefield triggers, and the 3 Fleshbag variants. So those just literally is a stack of random black shit that I run. A lot of those are just pet favorite cards, not exactly good, but they are probably going to replace some of the cards in this deck after I've had my fill of Bontu. But yeah, any ideas or opinions, always let me know. Cheers.